What's up, my comic comrades? Today we're taking a look at the phases of the Moon Knight 4-issue miniseries, and what makes this series unique and interesting is that each issue focuses on a different version or phase of Moon Knight, with each of his phases being represented by a separate avatar of Khonshu, and all four are pretty dope in their own right. Honestly, it's just a really good time to be a Moon Knight fan right now, because between the miniseries we're talking about today, the Vengeance of Moon Knight series that dropped in 2024, and the currently ongoing Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu title, there has been no shortage of good Moon Knight stories. We'll be covering all these titles in one way or another, but let's get things started with the complete phases of the Moon Knight series. In issue 1 of Phases of the Moon Knight, the first story we get is called The Once and Future Moon Knight, and this story basically follows Max Coleridge, aka the Shroud. If you're not aware, Max is a character known as the Shroud, but after Mark Spector's death, he became the new Moon Knight in the Vengeance of Moon Knight series. However, as we know from Blood Hunt, Mark Spector is back as Moon Knight once again, but in this story, apparently he becomes the future Moon Knight. Now, the story takes place before the Vengeance of Moon Knight issue 4, essentially filling in a gap for that series where we see Max is trying to prove himself to Mark. He wants to make him proud and show everyone else that he can be a hero, as we see Max beating up Waxman, saying he deserves this beating. He wasn't doing anything wrong, not this time, but he had it coming for a while. Mark Spector is dead, now I am the Moon Knight, as the rest of the members of the Night Shift come out saying, "We didn't do anything, Mooney." Captions then say Waxman, Digger, and Tatterdemalion, members of the Night Shift, a criminal enterprise I infiltrated in California years ago. Back then, the plan had been to take the organization down from the inside. But what's that old saying about making a plan? Now I have to live up to the new name I've taken. I'm the Shroud no more, as the comic then gives us his origin. We see that a young Max was a happy kid who played soccer and had two loving parents. But then one day, both his parents were shot down and killed right in front of him. He went to law school, but found out it was clear the law couldn't handle every problem. So he trained his body and mind with a cult. They showed him that being a hero was his destiny, and soon he became the Shroud, doing what was necessary to fight crime, even if that meant becoming a criminal. So essentially, the Shroud's origin is very much like Batman's, which was clearly on purpose, as they took his origin, but they made the Shroud a more violent version of Batman, basically. He even went undercover as a villain working with Night Shift. But in this story, we see he's making up for those times taking out Night Shift, which he does in gruesome fashion, setting Digger on fire, melting Waxman, and throwing Tatterdemalion off the roof with him landing on top of a car. Then after making gruesome quick work of Night Shift, he goes home to his makeshift base of operations, where he watches the news say the Moon Knight's reign of terror continues. Reports state it was Moon Knight who caused the damage. Moon Knight is the latest hero to lose it. Moon Knight's recent rampage caught on tape. Film at 11. Tonight's top story: has Moon Knight gone loony? As we see Max lay down on his mattress, happy with his work. So even though Max is trying to do good, we see that he's just being extremely violent and using excessive force, and even with the news reporting on that, he doesn't care. He seems quite content about it. Now that's it for the first story of this issue, but the second and final story of the issue is my favorite. It brings us a brand new Moon Knight from the year 1200 in England. Captions say Moon Knight was named Cassian, and he was born a peasant. He spent a life in the service of the keep, tending to the pigs and sheep, whose meat and wool kept the royals fat and warm. That is until now, as we see him being knighted, with captions saying an order of crusaders was traveling south and enlisting men along the way. They saw his size and told him to get on his knees and proclaim his loyalty to God and King. He did not believe in God or the king, but he believed in steel. And though he did not hunger for war, he did not mind the prospect of a sunnier climate. So he became a knight, and a very good knight at that, surviving 3 years of carnage, laying waste to everyone who opposed him. Captions say, but even in moments of peace, a war was underway inside of him. He was fighting for something he hated. He was killing so that the people who lived in the castles he stared up at his whole life would grow richer. He did not know who he was, but he knew who he was not. Without a word, he abandoned his order. But when he did, he got caught in a great sandstorm, one that was strong enough to blind eyes, shred skin, and drown his lungs. But Khonshu, the moon god, watched him as he wandered. Eventually, Cassian passed out, but woke up in Khonshu's tomb. A voice spoke to him that seemed to contain many languages at once, including his own. The voice says, "Step into the light." Cassian did not believe in gods or devils until he found himself in the grip of one. His history and his future scrolled before him. He would be the humbled servant who rose to become the hero of an age, so long as he said yes to Khonshu and became his avatar. Captions tell us he had devoted his life to serving powers and causes he did not believe in. He would not say yes so willingly to become a tool once again. So with that, Khonshu sent him back to the desert, but with a silver scarab clutched in his hand. He then walked through the day until he saw vultures circling the sky ahead. He wondered if they were waiting to claim him, but they were busy with the spoils of war, as he sees victims impaled on spikes. At that moment, the silver scarab flew out of his pouch and led him to Apocalypse, who was making making his slaves build him a pyramid. When Cassian saw Apocalypse, he knew he had to be taken down, so he waited until sundown to attack, but when he swung his sword at Apocalypse's back, it shattered. Captions then say kings built armies that slaughtered those they didn't enslave, and the slaves in turn built castles and pyramids for the kings to hide and rule inside. This was a war Cassian could devote himself to, a war against power, but the steel he believed in shattered, as Apocalypse easily smacks Cassian away. At this moment, Cassian knew that the only way to fight a monster was to become one himself. So he accepts becoming the avatar of Khonshu, and he became the Moon Knight. And with the power of Moon Knight, he was able to defeat Apocalypse. And as he holds Apocalypse's severed head to the people, everyone fell to their knees and cried out, "Khonshu, Khonshu." Cassian could not help but wonder if he had become the very thing he hated. But this brings us to issue 2 of the series, where we first get the story Nighttime in the City, which is a retro Moon Knight story dealing with Mark Spector Moon Knight. Essentially what's going down here is Moon Knight is being helped by Frenchie, tracking down a villain who's killing doctors, with his latest victim being Dr. Aaron Casement, who he stabbed 17 times. Moon Knight tracks him down inside of a mall and says, "Come out, rip and tuck slasher, let's have a proper introduction." The villain says, "Stupid name." Moon Knight asks, "What should I call you then?" as he throws his crescent moon darts at the villain, but he just hits mannequins. The villain then answers saying, "Night Raven," giving us the villain's name. Now for us comic book historians out there, we know Night Raven is a Marvel vigilante who began operating in the 1920s, first appearing in Hulk Comics issue 1 in 1979. Anyway, Moon Knight says, "Night Raven? Bull. The Night Raven was active in the 1920s. He's dead, not murdering cosmic surgeons in the here and now." The two continue to fight as Moon Knight says, "Either you're a fake or the real Night Raven's turned into a crazy killer. Either way, you're done." Night Raven then says, "Let me tell you a story, Moon Knight. I used to brand them. Burn my mark into their forehead as a warning. It got to be good business for face doctors fixing the scars I left on gangsters. But there was one, Dr. Anderson. He saw the money the underworld could offer by removing scars, giving fugitives new faces. That was small potatoes. Anderson needed a product. The gangster Edmund Falcone helped him find it. People, made to order companions for the wealthy and powerful. Anderson's blade sculpted their bodies to his client's specifications. Falcone's drug did the same to their minds. So basically this doctor got greedy and teamed up with a gangster and solicited women, doing plastic surgery on them, making them to the buyer's specifications. That is actually heinous. Night Raven tells Moon Knight, "I killed everyone I can get my hands on, including Falcone. Everyone but Anderson. I was young, like you are, new to crime busting. He promised me that he would spend the rest of his life repenting, would go straight, help people if I just give him the chance. I told him okay, but I left him with something that he never forgets, that I was watching, as he branded him on the forehead." Moon Knight says, "So you're killing cosmetic surgeons now because you didn't kill one in 29? Night Raven replies, "Yes, I said I'd watch Anderson, but something happened to me. I was poisoned. I wasn't myself, not for a long time." Night Raven goes on to say because of this, Anderson went back to work, brought in younger doctors as he got older, doctors who brought in younger doctors as they got older. Decades they did this to people, decades of lives ruined because I let a man live in 1929. Dr. Anderson died in 1988, comfortably, peacefully, painlessly. 5 doctors continue his operation today. I killed 4 of them." Moon Knight says, "You don't get to kill people. Work with the police, bring them to justice." But Night Raven then looks at him saying, "Don't be a child. Pillars of the community, philanthropists. Your justice was never going to touch them, but I can, and I have. And I will until my debt from 1929 is cleared." Ultimately, Night Raven says to Moon Knight, "You're right, Dr. Richard Cole. The last one. I'm washing my hands of him." Moon Knight asks, "Just like that?" Night Raven says, "It's your hard lesson. He's yours now. I'm passing the torch, mystery man. Do you want to choose whether he lives or dies? He's your problem now. And the lives he ruins." Night Raven then throws a dagger at Moon Knight and flees the mall. 1 week later, we see Moon Knight talking to Frenchie, being like, "Night Raven was right. No one will touch him. The lives he's wrecking are now on me." With Moon Knight realizing the justice system doesn't always work, and if you want to get rid of scum, you have to put it down yourself. Yes, this story was pretty damn dope. I love that Night Raven essentially was teaching Moon Knight not killing villains isn't going to work. You gotta kill the bad to get rid of them, which basically gives us the reason why Moon Knight puts bad guys down for good. It was essentially an origin story of why Moon Knight kills, and I thought that's really cool. The next story takes place in the year 2846. As captions say, the moon is leaving, the eclipse has begun. The arc of time moves slowly without remorse. Planets shift, and the moon is pulling away from the blue marble of Earth. This planet is suffering from this departure. Time is fractured, light is scarce, and creatures migrate erratically. Even the tide has turned ugly. Humans have continued to utilize this Earth and thrive, never to imagine the stark eye that ever watched over them would one day look away. It looks to desert them, as we see this very cool futuristic looking Moon Knight. So essentially, the moon is forsaking Earth, and we learn certain humans are part of a cult of Khonshu who worship him. Khonshu says they recognize the eclipse and believe they understand its meaning. being. They understand nothing. In times of desperation, humans look for answers, for security. They cling to the past. They look for answers from their betters, their gods. They know of my left fist, the Moon Knight. Its tale goes back many centuries, but the moon is leaving. They say I am unhappy. The Moon Knight must have forsaken me. There is only one answer. The Moon Knight must be sacrificed. So basically, this cult thinks that Khonshu is unhappy with Moon Knight, and because of that, they want to sacrifice and kill the Moon Knight, hopefully pleasing the moon god. So they ambush and try to kill the Moon Knight. They obviously get some good licks in and overwhelm him, but he holds his own as Khonshu tells Moon Knight, if you do not wish to be the sacrifice, then you must offer one of your own. Basically saying, kill the cult, which he does by teleporting them to the moon, giving him an extreme power boost as he's powered by the moon, and slices through all of the cult members. With Khonshu saying, you were reborn by the forever night, the one with no cycle, the one that lasts through eternal darkness. It will sustain you for eternity, and I shall carry you with me, for you are my child. Yet another cool story, not my favorite of the bunch, but a good one nonetheless. Either way, that means we gotta jump to issue 3. Alright, issue 3 has 3 different Moon Knight stories, the first one being pretty much a manga. Basically what's going down is at the beginning, this higher being is looking to save a few kids, but the higher being says, I can only save one of you. I'm Kandra Prabha. I give hope to the weak. I'll now give you the power to kill the lousy bastard who did this to you, as he grants the kids powers. We are then taken to the park where we see some more kids in a bad situation with adults, but luckily for them, Moon Knight arrives, who says she's Moon Knight, but also Lunatic Angel. As she slices one of the adults' heads off, she says, I've come to save you with the power of love and justice. Then another girl shows up and kills another adult, and we see this is clearly the 2 girls that were saved, and they're both Moon Knights. But in true manga fashion, we get a crazy weird monster that is all the adults combined together, and it starts to attack the Moon Knight. In all honesty, the story is pretty trippy and doesn't really go anywhere, but the next story is pretty dope. It takes place in the Museum of the American Hero in the New American Wasteland, 5 miles from the containment zone in the not too distant future. So what's going down here is there's this young girl named Ellie who works at a museum of the American Hero that's run by her parents. And we see them talking about dusting the exhibits, and she's all like, I just dusted them yesterday. I don't know what the big deal is. It's not like anyone ever comes here. Who wants to go to a museum next to the place full of infected people? Now her dad's like, are you fighting with your mom again? She tells him, we live in the middle of the desert. There's going to be dust. And no one has toured the museum in months. Her dad tells her yes, but that doesn't mean we just let the place fall in disrepair. We then see his security monitors and he tells us the Kramers up the road think they saw a few infected making it safely out of the containment zone. Doesn't seem likely, but if so, we want to help them get treated before they spread the virus. Either way, I do believe you have some cleaning to do. And as she's dusting, she sees someone has a gun to her mom's head in the reflection of the Moon Knight costume display case. The person shoots both her parents and gives her a bloody head. As she crawls out, she says, why? I don't understand. Khonshu then reaches out his hand and basically says, if you agree to become my fist and protect the travelers of the night, you will have your answers and your revenge. She of course agrees and becomes the new Moon Knight. Now the avatar of Khonshu, she could see the ghost of her dead parents, but also the ghost of the previous Moon Knight who begins to mentor her. But before her parents pass over, she asks, what is this place? And they tell her the truth. We're a way station to offer help to those who can escape the containment zone and want to live a life free of violence. We've been vaccinating refugees for decades. Those men want to spread the virus to the rest of the country. The virus strips people of their empathy and leaves them remorseless superhuman killing machines. You can't let that happen. You have to stop them. We love you, as they pass over. And as they pass over, she asks the previous Moon Knight, which she could see, you died decades ago. How come I can see you? He replies, because there's no expiration date when you make a deal with Khonshu. Long story short, he helps her on how to use her powers. She then turns a motorcycle into a badass futuristic ride and chases the guys down that killed her parents, literally ripping them out of their doom buggy with a chain and hook in gory fashion. After killing them, she forces their spirits to answer her before they pass over as to why they killed her parents. They tell her, we were paid to. There are a lot of people who want out of the containment zone. Some of them have money, and with them gone, getting across will be a breeze. She then tells the old Moon Knight she's the last line of defense to keep the people here in the desert safe as her and the old Moon Knight ride off together. As for the third and final story of the issue, it's a more cutesy story from Mini Marvels that deals with pizza being delivered to the Midnight Mission and there being confusion as to who ordered them, with us finding out it was several versions of Moon Knight who ordered it for their pizza party, like Blood Moon, Blue Corn Moon, Harvest Moon, Super Moon, Micro Moon, and more. With the pizza man just trying to get paid. But now we get into the fourth and final issue. Issue 4 picks up in Alexandria, Egypt in 1882, where we see a female Moon Knight rescuing 2 children from an explosion as captions say, my city is under siege from within and without. Pro-British forces and anti-British Urbists fight on the streets and the Fist of Khonshu is prepared to help the innocent and strike against anyone who deserves my vengeance. Now we learn this this Moon Knight was at her father's side ever since she could walk, and that her mother died young. Captions say, but she grew up to love Egypt's rich history, but to disdain the treatment of our historical treasures. Grew to hate the compromises to truth and morality made by men, including those made by my father. He sold our treasures to curry coin or favor, only to have them housed in foreign land. However, when someone stole some artifacts, the person tried to stop them, saying thieves, pushing them, but caused them to drop the canopic jar which contained the souls of Serket's faithful, manifested in demonic animal form. Once released, they yearn for life, and the only way for them to attain that is by consuming the living. So of course, Moon Knight has to put a stop to this. She says, I use the tools of archaeology as much as warfare. I've survived this long, so they must be working. But she soon realizes it's not going to cut it, so she goes to her father, revealing to him she's the avatar of Khonshu. He then gives her an artifact called the Fable Feather of Ma'at, which is used to weigh a soul in judgment for the afterlife. She is the light of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order. It works through her as a conduit of Khonshu's power. The spirits of the deities are unified in purpose. Balance is weighed, harmony is sought, the truth is revealed. And for the hosts whose lives have been stolen, order is restored, and vengeance is secured. And with that, she saves her country once again, saying, I have only my knowledge of yesterday and hope of tomorrow to better today. And that has to be enough for now. And just like that, we go into the last story of this series. Alright, so the last Moon Knight story takes place in San Diego, California during the events of Blood Hunt issue 5. Now, during this time, the whole world is being overrun by vampires, and a horde of them are closing in on a man named Rodney Fenwick and his two sons, Rod Jr. and Lucas. As the horde corners the father and sons, Rodney says, get behind me, boys, and don't open your eyes. One says, but daddy, he says, do what I say, Lucas. One of the vampires says, yes, listen to your dad, little boy. Close your eyes, join us in the dark. At that very moment, a miracle happened. The moon shines as a Moon Knight comes crashing through the window to save the day. Captions tell us the man in white begins to slice and hack his way through, attacking the vampires with violent efficiency, giving Rod enough time to see that something's different. Rod's watched Moon Knight on the news serving with the Avengers at least a dozen times. And even though the warrior in front of him looks and moves similarly to the Moon Knight he's seen before, Rod knows this is definitely not the same guy from TV. If Rod didn't know better, he'd swear this Moon Knight was part of the museum's exhibit, magically brought back to life. If Rodney Fenwick only knew just how right he is. You see, the comic then takes us into the past, where we learn this Moon Knight's name was King Kalmazir IV, ruler, warrior, father, and very old man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The comic then tells us that the king had two sons, and his oldest son had initiated a bloody revolt to take his dying father's throne by force, as his youngest son stepped in to take over for his father as the king for the day due to the blood moon. Because in those days, a blood moon was considered a direct assault on the king, a phenomenon to be feared. So the father was hidden safely in his chambers for 24 hours, and a temporary proxy king was set up. Elsewhere, we see the oldest son make a deal with the devil, the first vampire, who called himself Baal. Baal turned the oldest son into a vampire to give him the power to take over the throne. But Baal was not the only god looking to forge a partnership that evening, as we see Khonshu go to the king that night and say, your mortal fate is sealed. Become my knight, my fist, and together we will repel an evil far older than anything you could possibly imagine. I will save this world from Baal's wickedness, and you will save your most favorite son from the vile schemes of his brother. Right after this, we see the oldest son come to take the throne from his younger brother, but is quickly greeted by the king, who is now Moon Knight. With the power of Khonshu, the father makes quick work of his possessed son, ultimately stabbing him in the heart, killing him. Then we are brought back to the present, where Moon Knight is saving the father and sons, with captions saying, some say that history repeats, perhaps to a point, as we see the Moon Knight king save the father and his sons in the present. But there we have it, friends, the phases of the Moon Knight miniseries. This is a really cool series that gave us several stories of each of the different Moon Knights, some better than others, but a lot of really good ones. Now, Marvel is doing a lot with Moon Knight right now, both in the MCU and in the comics, so this series is probably laying a lot of groundwork for future Moon Knight stories. For example, one of the stories involved a Moon Knight from the Blood Hunt story. Either way, this is actually making me really excited to see Moon Knight in the MCU once again, because he's a really cool character that doesn't get enough love, but I'm happy that he's back in Blood Hunt and can't wait to see what Marvel Comics and Marvel Studios does with him. But what did you guys think of this series? Did you dig these different Moon Knight stories? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. Other than that, we'll see you next time when we talk about all things comics.